Welcome to On Becoming a Healer. I'm Saul Wiener, and my co-host is Stefan Kiertez. You're listening now to the second episode of our two-part interview with Dr. Lamenta Conway. In the first episode, she talks about her long journey from the Englewood neighborhood of Chicago to becoming a duly board-certified internist and pediatrician. And in this second episode, you'll hear how she came to start the I Am Abel Foundation, which is helping so many young people from communities that have been economically and socially marginalized who aspire to become physicians.
The work you do today is more than one piece of work.
Yes.
And a big part of it is how you make some possibilities emerge for other young people. But before I ask that, I want to make sure I understand the rest of your job. You work with the Illinois Department of Corrections. What do you do?
I am the Deputy Chief of Medicine for the Illinois Department of Corrections. So we guide the policies and the care for, it used to be over 40,000 offenders in our system. It's reduced significantly since the time of COVID, but are doing our best to provide the best possible care for our offenders. So that is what my job is, helping to, lead in those initiatives.
And yet you're also working with a foundation that you created. Tell us about that.
I started the I Am Abel Foundation in a response to Southside gun violence and the murder of my cousin due to that. And 6 months later, another one of my cousins who was 14 years old was also paralyzed. And it was one of those transformative moments that basically changed everything for me. And one of the stories that I could think back on was Mother's Day. And I was actually studying for my recertification boards in internal medicine. And it was Mother's Day. And I remember I had been up there studying away. And some of my family members, the young family members, one of the little boys in particular, had called me and said, "Sweetie, can I come over for Mother's Day?" Which to me should tell you everything about the problems that we have and the pain that we have in our community when a kid would rather spend Mother's Day with someone other than his mother. And I didn't just have him. I mean, there were others that came over that weekend as well, but they were a little bit older, so they came on their own. And they loved coming to my house so much that they would just take the bus and trains all the way from the far south side to come over. And I remember on this particular day, the one little cousin just kept calling, and I just wouldn't answer the phone because all I could think of is I cannot be bothered this weekend. I have got to study, and it's Mother's Day, and I'm not even enjoying Mother's Day. I've got to study.
Yeah.
And around the same time, my son was coming home from Purdue, and he was like, "Mom, I'm going to stop over on the south side and pick up a few of our cousins and bring them over for Mother's Day." And I remember telling him, no, don't do that because they're shooting over there. I said, "That's all I've been hearing is that they're shooting over there." And he said, "Oh, Ma's going to be all right with his 20 or 19-year-old frontal lobe." And he didn't really take my word for it. And I remember he went over there and it was fairly uneventful, but he had a full conversation with his cousin. And his cousin told him, "Hey, no, Cousin Corey, I'm not into any gang problems or anything like that. I don't have any beef with anybody. So you don't have to worry about me." And Corey came home and he brought the other little cousins that he was picking up at that time. And now I have a house full, right? It's Mother's Day. I should be studying, but there's kids running all around my house. So Mother's Day is done. And my son was heading back to Purdue. And he said, "Ma, I'll see you later. And I'm going to drop off my little cousins back on the south side." But as he was driving to the south side, he realized that he had forgotten his license. And he didn't want to be caught driving while black without a license.
Yeah.
And he literally drove back 25 minutes. And in that time that it took for him to stop back home, pick up his license and get back on the road, I remember maybe 30 minutes or 40 minutes into his ride, I would get a hurried phone call and all I could hear was screaming and crying in the back. And the very cousin that he had spoken with and said that, "I don't have any beef and everything is well, cousin, not to worry." He was dead in the street where my son was going to drop them all off.
Oh.
So they had essentially avoided this shootout event.
In a moment.
And it changed everything. And that cousin died. And the cousin that had been trying to call me all of that time, trying to, come over to my house to begin with, didn't want to be over there in that environment. And yet I wouldn't rescue him, right? And so this is kind of how this is leading up to this, and I wasn't there to rescue him from that moment because I'm busy trying to pass boards, and all this kind of stuff. And so he comes to live with us. And I think we got him off to a good start. He was a good kid anyway, this particular one, but he did witness this murder. And we brought him so that he wouldn't have to live with any retaliation or experience anything that would result from that. And he came to live with us. And when it was time to go back to school, his mother was living in the Inglewood community. But he was all situated and he went to school, was doing extremely well. He was being recruited for high school football because he was an extreme athlete, very sweet kid. And there was another moment like the one from before, 6 months actually to the day. And he was actually walking home from school and he became an accidental, unintended victim of gunshot violence or gun violence as well. And he became paralyzed.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was 14. And we were very close to him. And it was in that moment that the I Am Abel Foundation, I realized that, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing at these hospitals. I have these great relationships with these patients. They love me. I'm singing with my patients. I'm praying with my patients. I'm talking to them. I'm their auntie. I'm their sister. I'm their mother. I have this wonderful rapport and I am living my dream. And then all of a sudden I realize this is still not enough. Like this is still not enough. Like this relationship that I'm having with these people and they love me and they're walking in the room and they're like, hey girl. And then they realize, oh, I mean, Dr. Conway, I'm realizing that I am living my dream. I'm back in my community. I'm interacting with people personally. I'm changing lives and affecting lives in such a powerful and impactful way. And yet it is not enough. And that is the moment that I really realized after the paralysis of my favorite little cousin to Southside gun violence, that he was failed twice on that day that I didn't answer the phone because I'm trying to pass boards, because I'm trying to keep my job. And then 6 months later, he calls his mother and because he felt uneasy about going home. And certainly it was that moment that he ended up being shot and a bullet that wasn't even intended for him. And I'm like, and I'm doing all this stuff, but what about what's going on in the community? Like where all of this actually starts. And it was at that moment, I've got to do more. I've got to do more. I've got to, and what can I do? And then there's this moment of helplessness and hopelessness, and you want to do something, but what can you do? What's the most impactful way, or what way can you impact your community the most? And I think the thing that came to me was, how about I go and find the people. I was like, how can I make a difference and how can I change things? And I think our first work with I Am Abel Foundation, our first thoughts were that we would react to the violence, maybe by teaching CPR and first aid and stop the bleed. And we would have the kids be a part of that community going out and doing all of this, as ambassadors, if you will. But then I needed to do more and could do more, and that these kids wanted more. And that's when we developed the structure that is now known as the I Am Abel Foundation, which started with about 30 kids and has evolved to a reach that has touched more than 1,000 kids easily over our 5 to 6 years that we've been actually functioning.
Does this operate mostly in the Chicago area?
We operate primarily in the Chicagoland area. Our goal and our focus initially was on going back to those communities that were, I always say that no one checked on me. That's the way I felt. Back in the day, where people would usually, or organizations would focus their attention, would be on schools like, say, Whitney Young, that came along around the time that I was in high school, and other schools. People always go for the low-hanging fruit, the easy people or the easy groups that they could affect. Even this is interesting, and you see this going on right now. A lot of people who are philanthropists will give to HBCUs. And I think that's great. But I think there's one thing that people don't understand is that Black kids who are from the ghetto or from underserved and decimated communities, they don't go to HBCUs because we can't afford to.
And I just want to interrupt for listeners. HBCU is historically Black colleges and universities.
Yes. And so HBCUs are largely unfunded. compared to predominantly white institutions or PWIs as often described. And a lot of Black kids never even think about those schools because they're completely out of their reach. And with that, I decided, I said, you know what? I said, not going to be that organization. I'm going to be an organization that goes to the places that people forget to check on, like the places that are still here and still struggling, like the Inglewood community, or going to places like Phillips High School and Harper High School, and places where traditionally where no one is actually swinging by. And so that's how our focus was. But over time, it's evolved into a very diverse group of young people, still mostly socioeconomically challenged or disadvantaged, but from a wide variety of academic environment. A lot of kids from inner city communities. One thing that's very common about these kids is that they don't go away to college. And I don't think people understand that. They don't go away. They never see themselves outside of their community. They've never been outside of their community. For me to go even to DePaul, that was going far. And that's not far, but, for me to go from Inglewood to Lincoln Park was far. And most of these kids, even the ones in our foundation today, it is very challenging for me to even try to help them get scholarships to go elsewhere because they cannot see themselves outside of their community. And to that end, it would be wonderful if people actually focused on these communities, but they don't. So I do.
What are some of the main types of support provided by the I Am Abel Foundation?
What I like to think about I Am Abel Foundation is that we are a holistic mentoring community. That's the way I would describe us. We're not just a program, but we are really a comprehensive family. And I think that in order for these kids to be successful, they're going to have to feel like they're part of a community and not just a particular program. So I think that's the one thing we do a really good job on. We have what you can call case-based management. So for every kid, when we don't see them, we're checking in on them. We have all types of things like that. We have numerous mentoring events throughout the year where mentors and mentees can spend some time together. Every year before COVID, we had a Hawaiian luau out at my house, and it's gotten to be a huge celebration that's pretty fantastic and elaborate. And all of the newer students are meeting the older students, and all of the doctors come out, the medical students from all the area medical schools, especially Black and Latino kids. That's also expanding as well in terms of our community of mentors. Lots of events like that. We do a lot of humanitarian outreach and service projects, and we do those together as well. So those are some of the things that kind of create the holistic backdrop of the organization. But the other part that I think is very, very meaningful is our curriculum. We have what we call Saturday Morning Professor, where we teach the language of medicine. Our whole goal is to make kids feel comfortable with the language of medicine, so it doesn't feel like they're going to be learning something that's so far off into the periphery that they could never relate to. We actually bring preclinical experiences to the kids at young ages, and I actually think that that's even more valuable than just throwing another academic program at them, because there are academic programs at various institutions, but I don't think that there's anything quite like what we're doing at I Am Abel Foundation. So the kids are deeply immersed in a preclinical experience, and it's a pipeline program. So after they finish their first year, which is devoted to history taking, and actually the kids participate in a observed structured clinical exam, so to speak, at the end, an OSCE, just like the medical students, where they put on their white coats and they literally interview physicians and take a complete and detailed history, which they end up reviewing with the doctor who plays the patient, and the event is recorded. So it's an outstanding experience that the kids really look forward at the end. That's one piece of it. So, and once they finish this whole year of history taken, they move into other aspects of the pipeline. There's a 6-month stint in cardiology. And following there is a 6-month program in gastroenterology. These are both at Northwestern. They're also that we're building for the coming year. We're building another program in pulmonary critical care at Loretto Hospital. So these are all in 6-month segments. So as our community is growing, some of the kids will have to go into different branches in terms of their advanced training. So it's really exciting. The other thing that I think, though, Stefan, that I think is super important and a big piece of what we do is what I call affirmative academic advising, AAA or AAA. And that's where we tell the kids what they can do rather than what they can't. No one can do academic advising in our camp for I Am Abel Foundation if they're not going to give the kids an affirmative approach to their dream. We're not trying to sell them a dream because I know better than anyone that, just dreaming about something is not going to make it happen. But we have to affirm the kids, affirm their belief, no matter how dismal it might look, and then say, hey, it might look bleak right now, but what are you willing to do to make this happen? Because I think you can make this happen if you do this. And there's no guarantees, obviously. And I tell the kids that too. I said, you don't get a chance to have a safe bet here. You can't hedge your bet. You just got to decide if you're going to go for it and give 110%. And then let's see what happens. I said, we'll just keep on working towards our goal. And so our affirmative academic advising, I think, is very powerful because we sit down and we map out a plan which is outside of, but definitely complementary to what they may get at their college or university. And it's positive, and we're giving them the support that they need. Other things that we have is academic tutoring and STEM. So kids can now get the support that they need in the subjects that they need help with. So, it's not enough to push the kids. You have to actually help them if we're going to push them. So it's just been overwhelmingly positive. I think one of the wonderful things that I love about academic advising, Stefan and Saul, is that we get a chance to impact the younger kids' lives. So, for example, the kind of things that I never could get, the high school kids, I'm talking to their parents and I'm telling them, I says, look, you got a really smart kid. Let's go to the schools and you won't believe this, but I'm fight for your kid to be in some of these advanced courses. And you say fight? Yeah. I've had kids that were absolutely brilliant who were actually tracked in lower math classes, for example, simply because the school decided that they didn't think that the kid was worth the trouble or the try at something that was more challenging. And that's happened even with my own child. So this is something that is common to Black people. And I am now in a position, me and those who serve as advisors, to, help encourage the parents, let's challenge our kids in areas that they hadn't thought about before. So instead of just doing algebra this year, can they possibly place out of algebra and start with geometry so they can finish with calculus? Or can they do this or do that? Things that would allow them to be able to have the early exposures that would make college go a lot more simply than it did for me. So those are ways that we can impact early. And so that's one of the joys of academic advising.
I want to double check I want to make sure that I know the age range of the participants. And it sounds like you have high school and perhaps college and perhaps beyond. Can you tell us about the age range?
You are absolutely right. We do. We start kids in their freshman year and we take kids all the way through college and beyond. And we have it's very unique because the high school students are actually mixed in with the college students and the post-bac, and it all cancels itself out quite nicely because they're all learning something that they don't know. And that's, for example, history taking. And then next semester, they'll be doing physical exam, and that's going to be a part of that whole year process. The other important thing that I didn't mention, Stefan, is that all of the kids are partnered one-to-one with their own physician mentor and also a Chicago area medical student. So we call it like a triangle of support. So the student is at the center and they have as their anchors an attending physician as well as a medical student from the area. And we have tons of opportunities for them to connect, personally, but they can also connect in group settings as well.
Now that this has gone on for some time, what is the range of outcomes that you see? What some people probably do become doctors, but what's the range and what's the more common pathway out of this? Do people mostly go into health professions?
Our focus is on medicine. We're trying to keep our focus narrow because I'm a doctor and that's what I think I can help people do. But it's kind of funny. We have had some kids that defected, and it's a joke. They know how much I want them to just continue into medicine, but they also know that I respect the fact if they change their mind. So we had one young lady, I put her with one of my favorite mentors out of Mount Sinai. And interestingly, while she was over there shadowing the internist, she kept peeking over there and trying to see what the podiatrist was doing over there. And the internist told her, hey, you can spend some time with them, because all of what we're doing kind of manifests in, podiatric, diseases of the foot. So go for it. So she ended up going over there, and ultimately she's now in podiatry school. We've had a couple of students who have done that. We're going into our 6th year. So our high school students, many of them are just in college right now. So we should have a big explosion. But we did have a number of students who started with us at the beginning who were already in college or post-bac, and those students have already started medical school. So I'm excited to see what the next 5 years will show. But we definitely have a pretty nice size of young people who we kind of caught later on in their lives that are already in medical school. And that is the goal and plan. I have had a few students that have written me and told me, Dr. Conway, I've had the most beautiful and wonderful year. I really appreciate it, but I think I want to be a teacher. And I remember feeling so impressed that, the kids came away with such maturity. And I mean, not that we taught them that, but we were a part of their journey. And if they somehow learned that they wanted to do something else, but they gave it a good try, that means a lot too. But most of our kids do continue through the continuum, and they continue through the pipeline. And of course, we do lose some because I think they realize that this is serious and it's not fun and games. And we do have requirements. We have attendance requirement. Someone asked me the other day, do they consider my style tough love? And it's funny. I never thought I was tough love, but it was one of the teachers that came. I met with him afterwards. He said, He said, you have a tough approach with the kids. I don't really look at it. I just look at it as, I'm their mother in medicine. And what would a mother in medicine do if she was passing on legacy to her children? She would do what I'm doing. And that's what I do.
You said something in passing I think is worth at least pausing for a moment over, which is that some of these young people, and maybe even your own child, have been subject to some assumptions about what they can do and what they're capable of that may in fact be partly derivative of what the pigment is in their skin. Is that something you see?
I do see that. I also think that the world and their circumstances also tells them or informs them of their capabilities and what they can do. When you look in your community, Stefan, and you don't see anyone that looks like you in healthcare leadership, that also tells you can't do it. It tells you without telling you. When I spoke to one of my students yesterday, he's a beautiful and a sweet soul who is trying his hardest to get into medical school. We talked about many things, but one of the things that we talked about on yesterday was how when he was growing up on the south side of Chicago, he remembers the one doctor's office that was in a many mile radius. And when he arrived at the doctor's office, it was an Asian person, not a Black doctor. And again, my experience is I didn't grow up with doctors at all. And then when I finally did see a doctor, the first Black doctor I ever saw was actually when my grandfather was having heart surgery. And that is a very profound moment to me because I'll never forget my mother, when this young Black lady, she was very cute, smart, brilliant, and beautiful. And she walked out and she says, your grandfather, your father, talking to my mother, is going to do just fine. He had just completed a quadruple bypass. And when she walked away, my mother looked at me. And this was before I had gone to medical school, long before. In fact, this was during the desert time of my life, you could say, when I was tired and pretty much hopeless. And I was working at the lab at the point. And I remember my mother looking at me and she says, do you believe that? And it total awe, she says. She said, that was a Black doctor. And I said, I saw her. And my mother said, but aren't you happy? Aren't you happy? This is wonderful. It's a Black doctor. And another one of those crazy moments. And I remember tears that fell down my eyes at that moment. I said, I would be, except it can't be me. I will never forget that moment. My mother told me, of course, don't you believe that it can't be you? Too many times, I think many of our kids, myself included, yes, we have also been directly told that we could not actually do what we have ultimately done.
Yeah, one of the major themes here is what is the sum total belief about what I am capable of being and doing? And it's many, many things feed into that, including your models, including what people tell you,
Yes,
including your defeats.
exactly.
The name I Am Abel Foundation, I think, alludes to the story of Cain and Abel, but maybe you should tell us a little bit more.
It does. It alludes to the story of Cain and Abel. And it really comes from my conversation with my little nephew, who I call him my nephew, is actually my little cousin, the one that was paralyzed. And we got to talking about the violence and the circle, and both circle and cycle of violence, and how it could be fixed. And I remember one word he used, and he kept saying, well, the ops did this and the ops did that. And it almost sounded as if he were talking about something from a PlayStation or Xbox game, the ops or the operatives. And I remember listening and I said, wow, there was another one of those moments when I realized that so many of our young people who didn't have mentors to help model their behavior and their thoughts and everything, they didn't really look at their brothers and sisters as their brothers and sisters. They looked at them as ops, as something that was a depersonalized perspective on this other human being. And that really was the inspiration behind, that was the thought process, that they don't see these people as their brothers. And if they did, then they would be able to take responsibility for their brother and care for their brother and create a different kind of community. But they don't understand that they're actually responsible for their brother, and that this is in fact their brother, because their brother is in fact a reflection of who they are themselves. And that is what the inspiration for the I Am Abel, from, of course, Cain saying that he wasn't his brother's keeper, but in fact we are. And the play on the words is that we are also able, ABLE, to do exceeding and abundantly, as the scripture would say, above all that we could even ask or think. So it's a reflection on both of those thought processes.
It's a profound moment of disconnection when Cain says, am I my brother's keeper, having just killed his brother, and presumably having done so in part out of envy or spite.
Exactly.
But obviously he's alienated from his brother at that point.
Exactly. And I think that is the root cause of being displaced in your own community, being without hope, being without opportunity. It makes you look at the world differently. And then when there's no visible mentors to boot, it makes it where you feel like you really don't have anything anyway and nothing much to live for. So you focused on yourself and maybe just those small people around you, but not understanding how if we build community, we could actually create something powerful. But I don't think we always see that. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think that the I Am Abel reference in terms of building community is, Lamenta, you recognize that within the Black community, where you saw so much gun violence, people were not seeing each other as their brother's keeper. Mm-hmm. And that the community had been just shattered and devastated because of its experience and suffering in an environment of systemic racism.
Yes.
That it's so pernicious that this community just, had no kind of no links and ties among the young people who were just feeling so lost. And so the idea behind the I Am Abel Foundation is to create a sense of a shared future.
Absolutely. One of the things, and you kind of touched on it, is that many in our community with the educational systems are very impacted, vulnerable, and there's a lot missing. I actually mentor kids who want to be doctors who are attending schools where there's no physics, where there's no calculus, where there's no, advanced placement chemistry. Those kids, which was me, have no opportunity to go on to college and have a competitive edge because they're already starting from behind. So I think that's another piece of that too, is understanding the effects of systemic racism is that many of our children are relegated to an environment where they just don't have the basic things that they need to be successful. And it's just not really fair. But we can't fix it, or we haven't fixed it as a community. So that's part of what I Am Abel Foundation endeavors to do. First of all, just kind of be a stopgap, someone in the middle. Basically, one of the things that we always say is, I see our role, and I tell the kids that you have to see yourself as a wedge in the door so that others can follow. And I see us as an organization and creating an organization of young people that will leave the door open so other people can follow. But what's involved is that's an active process where we have to do all types of things in order to help the student actually bridge that gap and actually step from this side of the door to the other side.
You have had to bring together two elements. One is to create a safe place and a community and a sense of working together. And as you say, I am my brother's keeper as being the spirit of your foundation and how it works. And at the same time, you've also had to be incredibly practical and make sure that you are able to fill curricular gaps. And so that's why you've had all of these various tutoring programs. And then I know you also have a program that helps students get ready for the MCAT. And I know you're focusing specifically on certain aspects of the MCAT where students tend to have the most difficulty.
Correct. One of the programs that I was really proud that a lot of our mentees and a few that are actually in medical school now came back, and we put together this powerful, we call it MCAT think tank. And we work together with other faculty and other physicians to actually, look at what is the reason why we're struggling so much, with our standardized testing, specifically the MCAT, once kids get that far. And one of the things that one of the resounding themes is that there is an absence or lack of the full mastery of the sciences that's necessary and required in order for them to be successful on the MCAT exam and even in medical school. So one of the things that we came up with, we're planning to kick off our a particular focus, a specialized program of MCAT development called a developmental MCAT, where the students are actually being prepped for the MCAT, but in smaller chunks, where students will focus on, it's just a few subjects for that summer. We make sure that we carefully select the students so that students are not in over their head from the very beginning. So it's about building confidence and then building skills. And I do feel that most of the kids that, obviously we can't help every student. There are some students that will realize, this is just much more than I actually want to commit to. This is going to be a lot because we don't sugarcoat it in any way. As I was called by this one doctor, he called me a tough love mom. But I just feel like I'm just presenting them the facts that they have to contend with. This is what has to happen. This is what the medical schools require. And so we try to do our very best to prepare them. But while preparing them, I think it's super important that we set them up for success as opposed to failure. So that's what our developmental MCAT program is about, bite-sized approach that they can space over a couple of years. So if I tell you the story of this young man, it broke my heart yesterday. He was actually works full time as an emergency room tech. And at the same time, he was taking organic chemistry, physics, statistics, and an advanced developmental biology. And I had to stop him in his tracks. I said, you're setting yourself up for failure. I said, this is a full-time course load for people who are not working full-time. This cannot be done this way. And now you're surprised as to why you're getting a C or a D in organic chemistry. I said, you want to do it right so you don't have to do it over. And this is one of the things that a lot of our minority kids do. They're kind of stumbling around and they just need some re-guidance.
So, Lamenta, I think that because you're doing something that is so important in this moment in our nation's history and is really on the front burner for so many people, I think there may be listeners who would be interested in some way helping. And so I'd like you to share with us, first of all, how people can donate, actually, if they'd like to donate to the foundation. And then also, if they're interested in getting involved directly, how they could go about that.
Oh, that would be wonderful. If they would like to donate, or if they could go to the website at www.iamabel.org. abel.org. That's I Am Abel, spelled ABEL.org. And if they'd like to reach out, they can reach out to info at the same I Am Abel, IAMABEL.org. And that's the best way to reach out.
That's wonderful. And I know you have some staff that keep tabs on your email as well.
We started this in part acknowledging that we come from very different situations in life. And I deeply appreciate the chance to reflect about sort of what's universal here, which is that one needs people and moments to show any one of us what's possible, what you can actually do, and here's how you can do it. And then what's less so, which is that the opportunities to get that kind of support are unevenly distributed, and very often unevenly distributed along lines of race and ethnicity.
Yes.
While I was listening to this, I was also reflecting on my own journey. I'm learning disabled. And when I was a young boy, actually in second grade, that was picked up at a very early age because I came from a privileged background. My parents had PhDs, and I was in a relatively wealthy community, and I got tested at an age where it really matters. And basically just had incredible support throughout my life. And and then by the time I got to the MCAT, I had a paper trail. And then actually when I got to the USMLE exam, the ADA had kicked in. So there was now the ability to apply for special accommodations. And I had somebody who helped me do that. And so if I had been born in the community that you're helping, I would never be a physician. And so it's just so important to just recognize how much it makes a difference, being in the right place at the right time. And I think that what you're trying to do is close that gap.
Absolutely.